Fantastic. All right. Well, we have something a little bit different today. The folks that have watched me with my guests and friends in the past know that a lot of times it's been about entertainment, some silly stories behind the scenes, backstage. While we still might get into a little bit of that today, somebody that matters to me beyond that level. This person has recently come out with a book called Me, My Selfie and I
There it
that
is.
we're going to talk about a little bit. And she's also got a new podcast called Identity Talk. Janna Lopez is someone that I feel has so much to offer for many of us at the same time in our life that we're doing some self-reflection and maybe a different perspective. So I really appreciate you being here, Janna. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I told you I'm honored I made the cut. The Kevin cut.
There's the heavy metal cut, and then the people that don't know the nickname, they go into a different category, right? So
Right.
that'll be chapter 2 of the podcast or whatever this is. But
Or of your book.
right, yeah, we talked about that.
Hmm.
You know, one thing that I wanted to get to, there's a bunch of different sort of synapses that are firing when I'm talking about Janna Lopez and our connection together. The thing that really brought us together at the very beginning was music. And I know that that's a really deeply rooted passion of yours. So can you tell me a little bit about where that started?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I would say when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I grew up in LA and I was used to AM radio. And I remember being a kid and taking the Santa Monica bus for a quarter down Pico Boulevard to the beach and bringing my AM radio and listening to all the AM radio hits that were of that time. Maybe it could have been Captain and Tennille or Andy Gibb or or but I remember the profound deep connection to music with Elton John. I think Someone Saved My Life Tonight is probably the song that stays with me when I recall my childhood angst and deep connection and soul merging with music was with that song. And it just continued on until I was in my teens and lusted after Tommy Shaw and Styx desperately.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, a lot of people on here can remember this too. When I got my first Walkman, Paradise Theater was the album I got. But I was very much a rock and roller from the beginning. I listened to, in sixth grade, Van Halen's first album came out, Rush's Moving Pictures came out, Aerosmith came out. So I think that's where it became in my DNA, was just embedded with who I was. And I had hair up to here.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Oh, I need to pull those pictures out.
I do. I do have a picture. You have that. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
we do
Yeah.
have that picture.
Yeah.
And I would say that going to concerts and getting into different kinds of music, but it was always rock and roll.
Yeah. Well, growing up in LA at that point, right, in the 70s, oh my God, you've got all the bands that are breaking. The Britpop thing had come through and really made a major statement in the area. And so I know there's a Zeppelin connection with you too.
Oh God,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think my friend Audrey, who I grew up with when we were like 12, 13 years old, we would do our jam sessions in the bedroom. And I was always Jana Page and she was always Audrey Plant, and she would sing and I would jam out on guitar. And I think that is where, and I still have a collection of the KLOS stickers from my door that I had, because my room was plastered with everything on my door, from stickers to photos. There was not an inch of space that was bare on my walls that didn't have a photo
Oh,
or a glossy, an 8x10 glossy.
did you have a poster above the bed?
Fuck yeah, it was
Oh,
John Travolta, although I'm embarrassed to admit that
oh,
now.
no, man, he
So
was
embarrassed.
no, he was the man. You had John Travolta, I had Farrah Fawcett. That's the way it was back then, right? So
I know, it's embarrassing.
no, if you still had the John Travolta poster over your bed, that would be embarrassing. But
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, the I was gonna say the reason that I asked about the music connection is that you really focus in the book and a lot of your online writing about this identity shift. And I
Hmm.
think that was where you and I kind of connected at a deeper point. You had a series of things happen in your life that sort of they adjusted what your persona sort of represented, I guess I should say, right? So
Mhm.
um, you and I both have this deeply rooted thing with music, but did you feel like you're, because I know about some of the publications, but I wanted to see if like you felt like music was an identifier for you, that you kind of felt like that was an identity component as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think music is the thing that we can go to when we don't have words. Even though I love words and I'm a words person, I think Bernie Taupin will always be my favorite lyricist of all time. But I feel like music can describe the emotions in a way that words just can't. So when you're listening to an Eagles song, or if you're listening to a Led Zeppelin song, or for whatever reason, it just brings you to a visceral place that's deep and honest and true without explanation or justification.
Oh my gosh, that is so articulate. So you talk about this deeper place, being honest and vulnerable, and because that's what I get from your writing, and it's the thing that hit me, reading your book, because it was pertinent to my life at this point. So let's talk about the honesty thing and where that sort of became a focal point for you. Have you always been somebody that was just completely open with your feelings and expressive?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think we want to be honest with ourselves, but I think we get too used to second guessing or masking or having to explain away something about what we're experiencing because we're either comparing it to other people or we are hoping it isn't the truth of something that we don't want to see or we're not ready to see. I think the honesty in the book was required something of me that I didn't really even know I had or wanted, because why I wrote it and why I put it out are two different things. So I think at the time when I was writing it, I had to be honest because it was all about having a conversation with myself. And I felt like this was the time to do it. But I think I've always been definitely a little deeper, more reflective. And to some people, that's a pain in the ass. And to some people, that's like, wow, let's just sit and talk. And they relate. It felt like I never really fit in because people always seemed to be a little more superficial, or they were caring about things that I didn't really care about. And I always wrote poetry and other things that were a little bit more beneath the surface, I think. And not everybody wants to go there or can go there or should go there. And that's totally fine. And maybe there's some moments you should, and some moments it's better just left on the light and
Mm.
tight, So,
You know, just thinking about our relationship, and it's funny that people that say that they may not be able to get deep in conversation. Am I echoing there on your screen?
no.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
no problem. When you and I try to get together, and it's a sit down conversation where we're not talking about work, but we're talking about real life stuff. Um, I notice, a lot of times I'm on the go, right? I'm running late because I stack a bunch of things in my day. And you made mention, I think the other day when we talked, oh my gosh, it really was 5 minutes that you called me back. And when you asked to get together, oftentimes you'll say, how much time do we have? Do we have time to go deep? You don't ask that we can go deep, but I realize that a part of it, right, is that there's a level of superficiality that everybody kind of has on surface when you get together, right?
Right.
And I like that you ask that, almost like permission. Can we have more time so that we get past the surface? It's a neat thing. It's a nice ask. It's something that's hard for somebody that's kind of going and always expecting to be on the surface, but I'm grateful that you do that. Are you is that how you plan your day with everyone, or is this just because I'm a
No,
little flighty? It's just me.
no, 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 no. That's very astute. I mean, that's beautiful that you see that. I think because there are so many layers that I can connect with you and want to connect with you. And I'm mindful that you have and are pulled in multiple directions. And when we do have room and time, we have some beautiful, amazing conversations. And I don't want to just say, hey, how are you? And for you to say, I'm fine. And then we go on. Like, I really deeply feel and always have felt that that connection of beyond, the not, and again, not everybody can go there. So being mindful of your time and knowing how busy you are, I always want to see where you are with your availability to have a conversation. And part of it, I think, for me, has to do with trust.
Mm.
It's an interesting thing because I've been doing some writing, interestingly, that's more like meditative writing. And I don't ever really want to open up if the shop is going to close.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't
I,
ever really want to put myself out there or go there or give my trust or open my space, my heart, my life, whatever it is in that moment, if I know the shop is closed. Because I feel like people's time is their most precious, valuable asset. And the next thing that goes along with it is their heart. Like those two things are combined for me. And to give that, I'm definitely not going to open up if I know that I'm only going to have 5 minutes, because who the fuck wants to get cut off in the middle, right? That
right.
doesn't
Right.
feel good.
Totally. Yeah. You mentioned trust being a big part of this, and I can talk from my experience, that one failure that I might have had in the past with relationships is that I'd be so open, just incredibly open, that I wear my heart on my sleeve, and that gets me in trouble with maybe acquaintances and people that aren't so close to me, because it spreads out that the intimacy, I guess, that I might share with everybody. So somebody that I might meet for the first time in Thailand would get enough of an earful about me that, I it's not that I want them to know everything about me, it's that I put my trust in them right away. And then I realize that it's not fair to them, certainly not a good idea for me, because there are only so many hours in the day. There are only so many people that you really might want to entrust that level of intimacy with. So, hey, do you feel like in your past, have you opened yourself up enough to be vulnerable and have it kind of come back and cost you?
Such a good question. Yeah. I mean, isn't that childhood? I mean, doesn't that sum up the whole purpose of a counseling relationship and a I mean, I think it's pretty much, yeah. I think from the beginning, I didn't grow up with my father, and I missed having him around. And I feel like I always wanted to be not a burden on somebody, like particularly my mom. I didn't want to add any stress. So I think I just learned how to get scrappy and survive and be independent and completely self-reliant. I mean, that was one of my lessons in my midlife was, if you're so self-reliant, then who do you count on? How can you open up? And you're never going to get to the other side of those parts of yourself if you're always reserving and holding on to them as if they're good bottles of tequila that are only meant to be sipped for celebrations. You should enjoy them while they're here and available.
Right.
And I think that's part of it. The lesson is learning how to take life, be open, accept that everything is a risk and a reward, and it's not always going to turn out the way that you want. Definitely. In fact, probably never. Maybe a few times do things turn out the way we anticipate. But on the other side of it is something maybe interesting or different or even beyond what you might have expected that could also inform and teach and guide and give you something to move forward with in a more meaningful and profound way. We can't control how we navigate those things if we're truly being in life. I don't believe it's possible. You can't have the risk without the reward. And not to use a cliche, but everything that you put in with your heart, and like you said, the fact that you can open up to people, sometimes it probably backfires, but sometimes people are probably open in return, and you get something. You can get something out of talking to a stranger if you're really open in an elevator. Like if you're really into the moment of being present with somebody, there you can always get something in return that you never would have dreamed of, which is amazing.
That is a valuable thing. Absolutely. It's funny that this audience that we're talking to right now, at least on my end, of the people that I have in my friend group, the people that aren't directly related to me in some sort of way in terms of being in a band or having met them at a show, a lot of people fit in that category where it drives my kids crazy that I can strike up a conversation with a random stranger, and because everybody on the planet has a story, right? And
Right.
and it helps when we're facing a time like right now where the pandemic is affecting all 7 billion people on the planet, right? It's not just that it's not a New York thing or an American thing, or a political thing. It's affecting everyone. Everyone has a story about how it's affecting them. And you can look at that sort of decentralization a little bit in terms of communication we have with people. You could think about uh, just valuing somebody's time, even if you just smile and say hello and open yourself up that much. Because a lot of people, if you're on the elevator, they're on their phone, they're looking down. You greet them when you walk in the elevator with a smile. You might open up a conversation that okay, I'll say two things. It might open up a conversation that can develop a meaningful just part of your day where you can think, oh, they were so nice and civil, and it kind of sets you off on a good path. Now, unfortunately, women oftentimes get this, that you might smile at a guy that gets in the elevator and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And in his mind, because unfortunately, I'm painting a wide stroke here, but that it's probably come off a bunch of times that guys get the impression that, oh, she wants me. And a
But maybe they need that for that day.
yeah, but it's
I
do
mean,
you
I hear what
you,
you're saying.
you don't feel objectified? You don't feel like if they're
I guess it
oh,
depends what I'm wearing and the mood I'm in.
okay. Awesome. That's what I want. I want a little honesty. I
Mm.
it's interesting because you got to just be careful about it, right? I have unfortunately developed really good friendships with people, women, when I'm out on the road that I'm friendly with because I truly, genuinely just try to love everybody, but it gets misconstrued, and that offends people that I might be very close to. And so I would think that it's exponentially worse for women who are maybe in a relationship, right? Because there's jealousy and animosity that kind of goes on behind the scenes in a partnership. Sometimes, if one partner is so open that they kind of invite a little more attention.
Yeah, yes. I mean, you can't ever really gamble on there's so many outcome potentials. I think the thing that's interesting about what you're asking and saying is more that people are just too busy being buried in whatever their phone or what's in front of them that they don't look up and see what's going on around them. Like that to me is a much bigger, more prevalent problem or dilemma of what we're facing, at least before this pandemic. I mean, I remember I would go to the symphony or a concert or a theater or something. And I remember when I was even just 5 years ago, you'd go and you'd sit and people would be looking around and they'd be waiting in anticipation. They'd look at how people are dressed. They would be reflective. They would have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to be quiet and just absorb what's going on around them and take it in, like just
Mm,
to have that moment, just to take stuff in. And now everybody's on their phones looking down the glow.
yeah.
It's like that zombified glow that wherever you go, people are looking down. Even when I'm walking or I'm hiking or I'll be sitting in a beautiful place and somebody will have their face buried in a phone. And I think you're missing it. You're
Yeah.
missing everything that's going on around you, whether it's a conversation or a heron that's flying by or a tree or whatever it is. I think that we tend to distract and deflect to such a degree that we don't ever have those few moments of pause in between where some of those big moments of realization or epiphanies or even breath or reflection can happen, whether it could include a conversation too with
Mhm.
somebody. And maybe you just needed to hear that one thing that one day that one person had to tell you, but you missed it because you were
Right.
on your phone. So I feel like the disconnection is a much bigger thing. And I wonder how that's going to change after all this, because now we've been forced to have to sit and hang out and reflect. And for some people, that's driving them nuts. And there are real repercussions, of course, of life changing so drastically. But I hope,
Yeah. Right.
if nothing else, that we take away that, damn, it was fun to color a poster with my kid for a half an hour without looking at my phone or whatever,
Yeah.
baking bread. Like that's the thing everybody's doing right now, is trying to find yeast.
I just eat. I eat. I don't bake. I just eat.
Yeah,
But no, you're right. So that sort of disconnect is a major part of this. You identified that and started out this group online, which is really cool. This My Mundane group, and that's
right.
something where you can really focus on these things that you might overlook. You want to talk about that formation a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is the point of what I've tried to get out of this. So I think in the beginning, let's just say middle of March, when everything was really getting weird, I was really stressed out, like so many people, overwhelmed and afraid and uncertain, and the news, everything was really overwhelming. And I wasn't a walker. It wasn't like I'd go out and go walking, but I think sometimes the thought of being inside with the walls closing in just was eating me alive. And the only way I could turn my mind off from just going down a rabbit hole was to go walking. So I remember I started walking around my neighborhood, and it was just at the beginning of spring, and the colors were so pretty. There were so many pinks and oranges on the trees, and it was just starting to warm up a little bit. And I walked by this one house. There was a woman, and she was on her hands and knees, and it looked like she was praying. And I was like, oh, I wonder what she's up to. And then I got closer and closer, and I noticed that she was weeding. But it looked like she was in such reverence and in such prayer. And it was just such an act of holiness. For, I don't know how else to describe it, but she was just weeding. And I realized, wow, something so mundane could be so profound and substantial. And then I started thinking about all the things in my life that were small but substantial, that connect me and ground me. And I thought of all the commonality that brings. So I started this Facebook page called My Mundane, just to see, as an experiment, like what people were thinking about. And like within, it's been up like 4 weeks or 5 weeks, I have over like 820 people now. And
Right.
people are posting things like their toasters and their coffee mugs, their
Yeah.
pets, their flowers, their garden. I mean, whatever mundane. That, I don't mean boring when I say
Yeah.
mundane. I mean just simple, grounded things that are in your environment around you. And I know there are people on there that have differing views than I do politically or socially. And it's been really interesting because there's been zero political talk,
Oh,
zero rants, zero coronavirus conversations, like nothing. It's just
yeah.
pure connection and support and beauty and kindness. And I've never been part of anything. And I've gotten so many emails and messages saying, thank you so much. I love this page. It makes me happy. It's the one page I go to every day. And it's a reminder.
Yeah.
Like, I feel our most basic things that we have in our lives that we hold as sacred could be the most simplest. And we need to come back to those and be reminded of those, because we know that everything else can change.
You bet. Absolutely. You have also this other end. You've got the photography eye, this beautiful artistic eye that is so different than so many other photographers. Your perspective, you capture beyond, like, okay, so there's a series, right? Because you captured hummingbirds, incredible photos of hummingbirds, but you've also got different perspectives that, just like you mentioned that other people have a different um, connection with what might be mundane to them.
Mm-hmm.
You've identified things that have such natural beauty that other people may not see in their own eye. But once you actually capture those and you sort of add your element to it, it really does intensify the artistic element of that piece. It might be an archway. And I jumped on a couple of your writers' workshops, and you talk about that focus, or getting out of that photograph, what it means to somebody, because art is so subjective, and
Mm-hmm.
so it means something different to everybody. I love that you leave that open for people, but taking something that might be mundane to someone and then presenting them an opportunity to engage with it so that it becomes meaningful to them, I think is so rare. I love the fact that people don't get, wrapped up in any kind of political discourse, or, because there is no place for it there. There's one
Right.
thing for that, even though you didn't maybe establish a rule. I don't know if you did or not, but it's nice that they follow sort of a common rule that doesn't even need to be stated, because you painted the parameters nicely. So
I hope so. I mean, I would get on and say something, but
yeah,
it hasn't come up. And I feel so much of what I try to create is something I initiate or try to set parameters around. And that's one thing that I wanted to see just where it would go on its own. And it has not disappointed. In fact,
Good.
it's pleasantly surprised me. And I love that you appreciate the idea of the photography because I never considered myself a photographer. And I do love the details and I can't pigeonhole myself like with one style. We were talking to Jennifer Batten when I had her on my podcast a few episodes ago, she was talking about her musical influences where she's blues, she's jazz, she's rock, she's all these things.
Mhm.
And I kind of feel like it would be hard to classify her as a guitar player. And I feel like that's me too. I couldn't put myself, I don't say I'm a photographer. I take all kinds of different things. I like black and white. I love photographing old churches. Why the Jewish girl in me loves these old churches, I do not know, but I am fascinated and I love photographing them. And even with the writing, that's a little more straightforward, but with the photography and certainly with some of what I communicate and how I operate in the world, it's just not like, I don't know what to call it, which is a problem. I don't
You
know who I am sometimes.
you say it's a problem, but what I really love about the transition in this book was you painted this arc that talked about who Janna was, identified by what she did, right? And the thing that's so relatable, and the thing I really wanted to express in this conversation, because it hit me and it hits a lot of people that read the book. And I know that most of my demographic, we're all in a very similar age range. And I think there is something that happens at this shift. Maybe it's because of the way that the world is right now, or maybe just we're getting to a point where there's an evolution in heart and mind. But you said that it's a problem because you can't pigeonhole or label yourself, but labels are something that you really have mentioned several times that you don't want to be a part of. You don't want labels and to be identified as one particular state, whether it be certain health status, or or like you give me for an example. It's not just Kevin the drummer, or Kevin the dad, or the Kevin the web guy, or whatever. Uh, it's nice to not have to be that person only, right? It's nice to be diversified and feel like you're not limiting yourself, right? But what I want to know is how in this development of the book, and I know some of these answers, but I'd like for you to talk about where it became important to distance yourself from the identity.
Well, I didn't want to distance myself from the identity. That was like what happened. And I think that was where the sadness and the not tragedy of it but that's where the sadness comes in because I feel like midlife is this time where people go through where everything that they know themselves to be is based on what defines them. So we have kids, maybe they're going off to college, we have a job, maybe we get fired, we get a disease diagnosis because that happens, we start to get to this age, maybe we go through divorce, very common. I call them the 7 Ds. And so something happens, and then the main pillar of who we thought we were, or whatever it's related to, topples because we defined ourselves based on these things. And so that in my case, that's what happened. I had a business, it sold, it didn't work out. But before, I had this fancy title, I had tickets to Blazer games, I got press trips. It was fascinating and wonderful life. And then one day, literally overnight, I didn't have any of those things anymore. And it was a very disconcerting thing. Now, would I have gone on and evolved and maybe come into something else over time? Probably, but I believe, and I put out there that something fundamental has to happen to topple your identity, because the line I think in the book is like, who the fuck wants to be uncomfortable? So we don't want to be uncomfortable. And so these things have to happen. And that's what starts to strip away our relationship to who we think we are. I think it's midlife specific because that's the time when all these things happen. It's inevitable. And I think we're old enough to get it,
Yeah.
where we've had enough time and we're wise enough to see that people have died or committed suicide or heart attack or disease. And so we know that the rest of this time that we're given is a gift. And so we go on this process of trying to figure it out. Now, some people call it the dark night of the soul. I reframed it to be called the dark flight of the self, because we are like little birds flying across this big ocean. We don't know where we're going, and it can be very lonely and very isolating. So I didn't want to necessarily separate from the identity, but I found myself there. And I will say that what happens is like it's just grief. It's unnamed grief. And I don't think as a culture or as a society we talk about it as grief. We talk about it as a midlife crisis.
Right.
And every cliche that goes along with it, the secretary, the fast cars, you know, the lonely housewife, the gardener, you know, whatever variation that is. But we don't talk about it as grief. And then what is out there is so superficial and contrived, like 7 steps to bliss or find your happiness. So there's these really complicated problems. You're wandering, you feel alone. And I know you've been through this. Many of my friends who are at this age, and I say 40 to 60 or anything, you know, it's middle age it can happen at any time, but we're just not given the room or the permission to wander without scrutinizing ourselves. I mean, it's bad enough we have social scrutiny, but we scrutinize ourselves. Our expectations of who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do is so weighted down. And then you have the identity piece. Well, I was a teacher, or I was a rock star, or I was a web designer, or I was a husband. You know, you have these titles and they're no longer there. You have the pressure of the social expectation and social media and, you know, your selfie, I call it.
Right.
And really what you want is the ultimate feeling of feeling like familiar to yourself again. You know, we're just trying to find ourselves and how we fit in and how we become something different or new. And so much of it is extremely painful. And I was telling you that I thought, for all the musicians out there now who are faced with having to redefine their complete identities because they were out there gigging and playing on a stage and making music and connecting with fans. And I could see how it would be a really scary and isolating time. And that is exactly what I talk about in the book.
Yeah. Before the pandemic even came.
Right.
You know, but, you know, to make a light note of it, your experience and a lot of people's experiences kind of mirrors those. Remember the old VH1 behind the music stories about bands, but they always end the same. It's always the same story. You know, essentially, you know, they slugged their way out. They got to a certain status. They got to their identity level, and they had the cars and the money and then, you know, angst brought the relationships apart, and, you know, the record label fell apart or whatever. The bands ended up hating each other, and it got samey. And while we all have different experiences that led ourselves to the pinnacle of where we got to in our crises or our shift to become, you know, to the dark flight of the self, there, I know a lot of my friends, and I could include myself in it, the darkness, the fear, the grief that you talked about, the grief was paralyzing.
It is
like absolutely crushing.
It is.
I couldn't describe it. The only way that I could talk to anyone about it was if they'd already experienced it or they're going through it at the same time.
And even then it's hard. I mean, even then it's just like, how many ways can you say it sucks?
Yeah.
The word I came up with, it was after years of feeling this way. I could not find a word, and I looked and I finally found the word that described the association, and the word I came up with was inert.
Yeah.
Inert. I mean, it was perfect. Like, that's what I was. I was inert. And the most painful aspect of it, and I can bring myself right back to that time, the most painful aspect is feeling like a stranger to yourself. There is nothing worse than feels. And then you blame yourself. You're like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why can't you fake it till you make it? And I talk about all those things, but I will say, like what you said, to put it on a lighter note, I also think some of it's kind of ridiculous and funny. And I take some of these situations and exaggerate them to the nth degree so that, you know, at my own expense, you know, never at anybody else's, at my own expense, that there are a lot of parts to this which are funny and ridiculous
if you
and
can't laugh, you'll cry. Yeah, about that phase and also what's going on right now, right?
Right.
Like if there's an opportunity to be able to see some of the silver linings of the outcome of the pandemic, like you just mentioned, you would hope that people's creative sense and appreciation for the mundane things is much more evident at that point. Those are
I've
really,
heard a lot of stories of people doing amazing things
yeah,
they never thought they would do, things they're learning, things they're discovering. I have seen some incredible resilience. And again, I know there's a lot of people struggling out there. I'm not taking away from the pain
yeah,
or the fear or the uncertainty. And I've seen the other side of it or in addition to it. And if you're in a place where you can't get there and you're feeling uncertain and afraid, I get it.
yeah,
And also, there's so much fertile groundwork, even for myself, like everything I've done in the last 6 weeks is just, and look what you've done. Look at all these conversations that you've had, all the people you've brought together, all the people you've inspired just by doing what you needed to do to keep yourself moving. So we surprise ourselves. Human beings are amazing and interesting and tragic and weird and fucked up and
yeah.
a whole mixed bag of stuff. So at any given day, it's like you can make the decision and try to decide how to navigate it for you, not because it's what people tell you to do or what's expected of you, but being honest and true to yourself. It takes a lot to get there. It is not like
Oh,
something that happens overnight.
that's the truth. We talked about on your podcast, the honesty that you find in yourself is something that I didn't even know where to find it. I didn't know it existed. I didn't know that I hadn't had it. As I sort of work a recovery program, and one of the slogans is "To thine own self be true."
Hmm.
And I it was lip service to me for a long time because it didn't make any sense really. I thought I was completely authentic, you know, but some of that development, a lot of the work that you talk about, it's work to get there, comes from a lot of different areas. It's not just reading, a Tony Robbins book and then walking out and all of a sudden I can take on the world. I love the fact that there are different environments to get some of that, and what fits you. It just
Yeah.
the
You got to
time limit.
find your own way, and there's a lot of allowance. People talk about the word acceptance, and I hate that word. I don't hate that word. I really highly dislike that word because it infers that you're supposed to do something and you may not be ready to do that. You don't even know what that means,
Right.
but allowance makes room for the process that's natural and suitable for you in your own way, in your own time, because that's all we've got is this ability to make our way, to discover, to and make room for it. Give yourself some self-forgiveness. And I've seen it with you, like we're all so hard on ourselves, and you've come such a long way with making room and allowance for just what's there and what's to discover. And I've seen it, and it's been a beautiful thing to watch. So if you can not be so hard on yourself, have less expectations, find your own way, not one size fits all, and it just recognize there's grace and forgiveness. And it's interesting that you said to thine own self be true. You didn't really, the words didn't connect. I've heard things excuse me, millions of times, and it didn't resonate until I was ready to understand it.
Right.
You can hear what self-love. I've heard self-love so many times that those two words have meant a million different things to me.
Sure.
And and only now recently has it started to come back around where I'm looking at it again. You can keep learning, keep growing, keep discovering.
Allowing yourself some grace. You talk about expectations. Managing expectations, I think, is a huge element to focus on if you want to start to give yourself some grace, to really, if you're stressed out, if you're overwhelmed. I know for me, I want to have everything perfect right away. And that's been a part of my past, and seeing this progression. I've talked a little bit about the progression. If I look at where I want to be in terms of my own sort of um, self-development, Everest, I want to be Mr. Rogers. I'd love the Gandhi component where I can just love everyone and not have resentment and let go of a lot of the past stuff that I was, the wreckage that I left behind. And obviously that's not going to happen. I can't climb Everest overnight. And so what tools am I taking along on my hike and my journey? And the perspective of not needing to get to Everest tomorrow, but knowing that I can hit base camps along the way, take some stops. Your book, it's interesting how much I could relate to so many parts of it, that they were like little base camps for me. I'd make little notes and say, oh, yeah, she was facing this same thing just a few years ago. I can totally put myself there. So I think you made it relatable, not only to a woman who's facing her midlife shift, but I think everybody that kind of has those sorts of challenges and maybe needs to find some sort of self. For me, I get turned off by self-help books.
So
You know, I do. And so
yes, I do too.
I don't see this book coming off that way at all. It was a personal experience that just happened to relate to so many people. When I hear somebody else go through something and come out facing the adversity, come out with some real just poignant things that I can hang on to, and I think that's more helpful to me than any self-help book.
I wanted to call it, as a joke, a non-self-help book about one person's imperfect self-helping.
Yeah.
And ideally, what's interesting is the people that have read the book, I've heard more from men that it has deeply touched. I've gotten profound, lengthy emails from men who said, wow, this really was amazing, because there's something about permission or forgiveness or non-shaming, or I don't know, there was a whole host of things, but men have strongly resonated with this. And I wrote it in, and I too I have a hard time with self-help books because they're so prescriptive,
Right.
and none of them ever resonated with me. None of them ever felt like my life. I can't run off like eat, pray, love. I couldn't run off to these beautiful exotic places, and she didn't have kids. And I'm like, who the fuck is this? Like,
Right.
how are you going to do this? It doesn't make sense. It didn't seem reasonable. I call it the better homes and gardens theory, because you'll buy the magazine that has the beautiful pie, and then you're going to say, I'm going to go home and make this pie. And you've got all the intentions in the world. You get home, you don't make the pie. You feel worse about yourself because you didn't make the pie. So I didn't want it to be, I mean, there was never really an expectation that I was going to be the answer for everybody. All I wanted to do was help people feel less alone. The beauty of it, and from what I've heard from so many people, is that are different parts that have touched different people for different reasons, which is perfect. That's exactly what you want. You want people to see themselves in your mess. I did put my mess out there, and I felt committed to the spectrum of messiness, because that's the point of the book, is that it is not tidy. There are no one size fits all, and to make room for the way it's going to go for you, and that it's part of what we have to experience. And this is what happens in midlife. It is
Right.
not tidy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sucks.
Especially if you have relationships, like a long committed relationship with a romantic partner, you really were vulnerable in those parts and honest. And so you maybe want to talk a little bit about how that relationship led into some of the parts of the book, and then the outcome of them reading it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I call that chapter How to Be a We When There's Nothing of Me. Whether you're with somebody or you're not, it's struggling with midlife identity or identity at any point is a really difficult, insurmountable thing to have to go through. You feel so alone. And then the burden of being with somebody who you feel so responsible to and you love and you care about and feel completely disconnected from at the same time is really weird. And in my case with Mark, there were plenty of opportunities for struggle. And I tried to be kind in discussing and looking at the differences, because I think the hard part is when you're with somebody, there's a very confusing line between what is my shit, what is their shit, what is our shit, what is just shit. It's shit sorting.
Right.
And it's hard to know whose is what. And I did feel responsible, and it was my problem. I was the one who felt lost. I was the one who was disconnected. I was the one that was searching. So it really wasn't on him. I will say that he was kind enough and patient enough to give me room to figure it out, which I'm really grateful for. And I tried to be as kind as I could and as understanding as I could relative to some of our differences. The reason why I brought our differences up and our struggles up was because I think every couple has something, some bag of tricks
Mm.
that they're trying to deal with or navigate. And mine just happened to look like this. Everybody else's, yours was going to look somewhat different. But the fact is, you've got a bag that you're trying to unpack and figure out how to sort. So that was the reason why I brought that up. So when it took me about 4 years to write the book, I didn't do the last portion of it until maybe the last year. And I had to go to Santa Fe, New Mexico to go sit alone for 2 weeks. And the whole purpose was to tackle what really happened with my business and what really happened with my marriage. I left those two for last because they were extremely confusing and painful, and I needed some room. So some people take a sabbatical. So that's what I did basically. I went and sat alone for 2 weeks in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Those were the two things I tackled. When I came back, I worked on compiling a draft of what's going to be kept in, what's going to be kept out, what's relevant, giving myself permission to make it be the book I wanted it to be and not what I thought it should be, because that's a whole other thing for anybody who's ever
Yeah.
written anything. That is so hard to give that room. But when I was done, I handed him the draft. He was the first person I gave it to because it was so personal. I couldn't have gone on to publishing it or putting it out there if he did not sign off on it. And especially because most of it includes him and it affects him. And things I thought he would comment on and bring up, things he didn't know, he really didn't. He was kind in that way. I dedicated the book to him and to my kids because he really did show me unconditional love. It's a brave thing that he did to allow me to speak my truth and my story the way I saw it, because his is obviously different for
Sure.
different people. So for that, I'm forever grateful. Like, not a lot of people get that in their life. And I recognize that I needed to do it, and he knew that I needed to do it. So those were the two things I had to, I needed to tell the story, but not because I felt like my story was so great or different or original, but I felt really committed to the idea that I didn't want people to feel alone in midlife, and that there was something out there that they could relate to that wasn't over prescriptive and showed all the messiness.
You hit that. And then you got another component, the addendum chapters, right? So you left, chapters, and even those are actually really important to be able to share, I think, your perspective on them. So you want to talk about the next phase?
Like after we were fine and now I was fine, like getting to be fine. So I
Uh,
thought I was fine.
yeah. So yeah,
And I wasn't fine.
you landed. I don't want to give too much of the book away because I think it's really important the way that arc proceeds in the book. But friends of yours know about your diagnosis, and are you comfortable
Right.
talking about it?
MS.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had gone through this whole series of things that I thought I was going to write this book where I had found myself, and it was, and I did have some really amazing experiences along the way to help me get there. And the growth and the insights were all true. But then at the end, it was like, it was so tidy. I was doing exactly what I didn't like. And then my ending wasn't tidy. So I'd finished my first draft. And then 2 months later, I got my diagnosis that I had MS. And something else with my idealism of how I thought the whole book was going to end ended up shifting my whole way of seeing how idealism can sometimes poison the well of what really is happening and the learning that needs to transpire. Because I think we just so want that ending. We want that beautiful Hollywood tidy, wrapped up in a bow. And the examples I give are like, at the end, Jack, Chrissy, and Janet make all their amends over a beer at the Regal Beagle, and the Fawn slaps the jukebox, and Julie and Gabe Cotter talk about his uncle over dinner, and it's like,
Yeah.
that's the way I grew up. 70s sitcoms, man.
Right.
It was like the ending was all 22 minutes and tidy, and maybe it's in my DNA, but it just never even if I'm idealistic and I'm like a little 7-year-old girl that wants that so badly, it just never really turns out that way. And it's not to say that it's better or worse, but and I
It's
felt
real.
like that was important. It's important, and you to show people that I hear you. I understand your ending is not going to be tidy. I understand that we don't always land the way we anticipate, and that's part of it.
Yeah. So much vulnerability in there. Really. I
Were you
was
surprised when you got to the last part? Because we haven't talked about because you finished the book, but we haven't talked about like your whole, and I know that's probably another conversation, but you were one of the people that I really thought about, because I knew some of what you were going through with your own identity shifts. And you are like, people like you and us are why I wanted the book to be out in the world, is, so you have something, you feel that somebody or something that's by you when you're going through it, to know you're not alone. So I just wondered, by the time you got to the ending, did you feel you were heard and understood and seen?
well, I'm trying to think of when I started the book, because I wasn't alone, I don't think, when I first started the book. And so uh
I mean,
uh
emotionally alone.
right. Yeah. I was, I can answer it with a couple of different sort of responses. What I got from the book painted this picture that this the dark flight of the self phase that I was in a couple of years ago. I liked having somewhat of a label on it that made more sense to me, so that I could put it behind, and felt like, okay, that chapter is done in my life for now, knowing that it could possibly come back, but it probably wouldn't come back in the same intensity, because
Right.
I've learned to circumnavigate some of that stuff. Um, and so where I felt this sort of sense of exhilaration when I get to these parts in the book, I'm like, yes. And that part does work out for her. She did land in that way, in the right answer. And I feel that way too, that I feel like I can be authentic and completely sincere with myself and other people. It's uncomfortable to be so brutally honest sometimes, but it's important. Authenticity, accountability is the one thing that I'm trying to work on, just more than anything right now. I don't make New Year's resolutions, but a resolution type of thing that happened to me in this book was that I wanted to be able to put some of those dark flight of the self elements in the past and really focus on, all right, these are the productive things. These are the things that work. The very few things that I have under my control, I can do, you know, and
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing which I want to stress is that just culturally and socially, we're not given the room or the spaces to be ourselves.
mm,
We have pressure from our friends, family, social media. That's why I call it the selfie, me, my selfie, and I. The selfie is the person that you project out in the world because you have a job or
yeah,
expectations, or you've got your Instagram, hashtag.
right,
Like,
yeah,
there's so much that you're putting out there, and I imagine with a lot of your friends, your musician friends, especially people that are out there on the stage and showing up in the world, there's so many expectations and things that go on that people aren't aware of, the business pressures and the pressures of time and production and making money and being seen, and you're on the road and you're constantly going. But it's like you have one life. You have one time in your life where you have to stop. I mean, I'm sure there's many points in your life, but midlife is particularly a profound time because kids leave, things change, jobs
hmm,
change. But it feels like I just want people to understand that you are your biggest cheerleader, you're also your biggest critic. And if you don't show up for yourself in a way that
hmm,
works for you, and you and just, it doesn't have to be all work. It's just more about, hey, I'm here, waving yourself. I think part of it is we just don't even know who we are. We get
right,
so disconnected from that, that with this one life, recognize there is somebody in there outside of what you do that is who you are. And that's an amazing, beautiful, precious, wonderful gift waiting for you just to come back and say, hey.
Yeah, absolutely. That really is a gift. I think people stand in their own way far too often, myself included. My experience has been that I am certainly not only my biggest critic, but also my biggest barrier. And I'm a slow learner. I'll make a bunch of mistakes over and over again in a row, instead of screwing up once and then going, okay, I learned from that and move on. It just takes me longer. And
But you're learning.
yeah, and you know what? I'm okay with that now too, knowing that that's my style, because it's progress. Doesn't have to be perfect. And again, I'm on the trajectory. I'm hoping that I can hit a base camp. I'm not going to fall off the precipice and fall down from Everest all the way down. I'm just going to continue to work on that trajectory. And I got a lot of that from the book, and it really is a precious gift. I didn't come off like you said, hey, if you do this, this is what will happen. It's not what I got there at all. And I think anybody that's reading the book will be able to relate their life without feeling like they're being told what to do to avoid or to come out at the other end of dark flight of the
Yeah, I
self.
definitely don't tell anybody what to do. And I want to also say, thank God for expression. I mean, that's something I've had to learn also, how important. And with writing, I can't speak to music. Maybe it's the same for music. I'm imagining it might be. But there's two kinds of writing. There's the writing where you take an idea and you develop it, and your mind is dictating what it's supposed to say and where it's supposed to go. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You want to craft a beautiful paragraph or a beautiful sentence. So that's what you do. And then the other kind of writing, which I'm just learning at 52, 3 to do, is because I'm in a creative writing MFA program, is the writing that guides you where you're so deep or making such room, or you're out of your head and there's no judgment about what it's supposed to be or do. And this writing comes up. And I imagine if you're writing a song where you were so deep into it, and all of a sudden you have this like opening or this epiphany about something, and it teaches you something about yourself. It makes you cry, or it makes you laugh, or it shows you something. And the fact that we have access to creative expression right now, whether it's music or writing a song or writing words or painting or whatever it is such an amazing gift to utilize, because we have the time and the space to tap into it at a level that's deeper and more meaningful, if we can get out of the expectation of what it's supposed to be or do. And I feel like that is the gift in all of this, because so many creative people who are extremely expressive, that what an amazing time to see what everybody's producing and creating. Just, it's been so cool to watch.
The new renaissance, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a beautiful thing. When you talk about these writing workshops, the writing workshop that you've done online with participants, I love the fact that you present those opportunities for them to completely express their inner sort of creative sense without dictating, saying these are the rules.
Right.
The only parameters are time, and just saying you'll present a concept or you'll present a picture and say, basically express what this does to you, what this feels for you. And even when you posted a few photos of these really close up, beautiful plant photos, and you said, I have 4 photos that I wanted to get some input on. Um, just number 1 through 4 with you had a sort of pilot test group of a bunch of people saying which speaks to you the most, or which do you like the most. And I made my comment just because it was complete feeling. It wasn't the composition. I thought, if I look at the colors, and it was really about just how it spoke. And I
I like
love.
that you said that too. You said number 1 speaks to me.
Mm.
I thought that's fucking awesome.
And that's what you ask of people. I really like that you don't ask somebody to say, show me a picture of a red rose. You'll say, what does a red rose make you feel like, right? So I think, I don't know your children hardly at all. I've met your son a bit, but I would imagine that when you sit down and you read, like, color a book with your son, um, that it's not all inside the lines and super tidy. I bet you have a really good time being creative and expressive, and it doesn't look like something that would come right out of a, Better Homes and Gardens.
Well, that's very sweet of you. That is, of course, if I can tell myself, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you should be doing. I mean, I think parenting is the one area where we don't let ourselves off the hook with expectations. We're always going to feel responsible that we should have been doing more or could have been more. And
Yeah.
that was another thing about the book, which was interesting, is that I did talk about my relationship to my kids, because in a lot of ways I checked out, I was absent and going through my own depression. And how much of that do you put onto your kids? Should they know who you really are? Should you keep everything to yourself and silent and
Yeah.
suffering? But I figured that no matter what, they're always going to have this book, and they may not understand it now or get it now. My daughter's 19, my son is going to be 16. And later in life, they'll know who I was, even for right, wrong, or indifferent. They're
Right.
always going to know who I was. And I did stress out about writing such personal things and worried about what are they going to think of me later in life. But when you're writing something to such a degree, if it's honest, you can't really worry about that, and just
Yeah.
know that everything is going to change. Their relationship to me is going to change. The relationship to the words are going to change as they change, because our relationship, think about your relationship to your own parents.
Yeah.
It
Absolutely.
changes when you get older and wiser. You're able to understand them more. Maybe you have a little more kindness and a little more grace, and I'm not saying you, but
No.
you,
Yeah.
general you, that we can forgive our parents just as we can forgive ourselves. And so with my kids, I figured they may or may not. I mean, I am who I am.
Yeah. The importance, if you're focused on authenticity and, being honest with everybody else in your life, having your kids be the person that get to know the real mom is so key. My son's mom, Jen, her whole identity was wrapped around being mom. First, it was being Kevin's wife, and she was always Kevin's wife, and that was a tough thing for her, to have to be um, a sort of a secondary, sort of figure. And then self admittedly, she would say that being a mom was the one thing she wanted more than anything in her life. And as your kids get older, not just her kids, but a lot of families go through this. Seems to be a real big thing with moms, that when the kids start to get older and they're, leaving the nest, that whole sense of identity goes out the door. And everything that they consumed in life, they were all consumed and all in 100%. If you go all in and then that gets sort of yanked out from underneath you, right, then there's a there's a long way to fall. And so I am I'm grateful to be able to see progress. It's good for her to be able to express those feelings to her kids, because at some point, if they have kids of their own, it'll make sense to them. Just
It'll
like
take time
it,
too.
it will, and it doesn't have to be something they understand right now, because they model everything you do. They watch, even if they don't tell you that they watch, they see your actions. And if I think I watch, if your kids are watching mom paint her whole soul for people to read, including them. And that's warts and all. That's the mistakes I've made and the conquests I've done. And all the speed bumps I hit led me to where I'm at right now. Being a present mom right now is about having, written the chapters and learned from them. I would imagine that they're going to appreciate that book so much more as they get older.
Do you
Knowing
appreciate your parents more now that you're in a situation where, like, when did you start to rethink how your relationship to your parents came through? Like, did it start with your recovery? Did it start before then? At what point did you start to re-examine that?
I didn't even give him a chance until I was in the early 20s. I didn't, I resented everything about
Kids are
parent.
assholes.
They are. I was the king of them. I really was, man. We have this beautiful, stunning cabin location in Montana in the woods that people would give everything in their life to go to now. And I could not wait to get out of it and go to Hollywood and rock and roll. And I look at it now, I think about my dad went on sabbatical to go to the cabin and live there. And I was such a piece of shit to him. I was just a real asshole as a teenager, angsty. I had one thing on my mind, that was taking my girlfriend to Hollywood and going to rock. And yeah, so it took me 4 or 5 years, got through college, and maybe a couple years after college, it was at a point where maybe the frontal lobe was developed a little bit more. Maybe I was capable of being a little bit more empathetic. But now when I look at the gifts that I was given from my parents in all respects from early on, 5 years old, and developing my mom taking when I was a petrified, shy kid, my mom coming up to strangers and saying, shake their hand, look them in the eye, and say, I'm going to be your new best friend, was one of the biggest gifts my mom ever gave me. Just ultimate confidence. My mom is fearless. And it's amazing to me how I just have so much pride. And my dad is so creative and such a really warm, kind man. And he's influenced people in a lot of ways.
His
I
art's beautiful.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I've
I
looked at
really
his art. It seems like he's evolved in his identity with his art. He had some very interesting shifts in his artwork. Some of it seems a little more modern and contemporary and
yeah.
conceptual now. I looked at
Yeah.
like the most recent stuff, but he's evolved with his artwork. I took a look at it. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually going to do one of these conversations out in Montana. I'm going to walk through his studio with him and have him show off some of his new work. And
That's good.
yeah, yeah. But to answer your question in a long, circuitous way, tons of respect that I have for my parents now. And some of that did come with recovery too. You know, my dad, guided me in a lot of ways early on with that too. And I think I don't know that I would have survived had I not. So I just think you've really made a blessing for your kids by putting this together, even if they don't see it right now, and you may not see it right now. If it's a selfish thing where this is just put out because this is what you had to do, I think the book was really important. And I see the other pieces that are coming out with you, Identity Talk, your new podcast, and the even my mundane page on Facebook, your connection with people, because you really do have a community that you've built. People that are in the book sort of the camp that have bought the book and appreciate the book are recognizing your gifts, and so it's nice to see that they're on board for some of these other components.
It's hard to take that in too. I mean, I think that's something that's part of my lesson is, so I did create something, I did express something, and it's going to go out in the world and reach people at different points in their lives, at different points in my life. And maybe things will come back to me 5 years from now and I'll have to really reach to where I was during that time. So it's interesting to see what that's going to be over time, because I think I had expectations, of course,
Mm-hmm.
surprise,
Yeah.
about how it was going to show up and what it was going to mean. And there's no way to do that. I think with any art, music, writing, anything that you put out, you never know how or when it's going to touch somebody and how it's going to come back and how you're going to hear about how that affected somebody's life or influenced them. And there's going to be hundreds of people whose lives you touch that you'll never know. And some people will brave the the effort and reach out and let you know and say thank you. And some people tell you, hey, it's shit, and they'll give you 1 star or whatever because it makes them feel better. Or maybe they really didn't like it, which is probably okay too. So I think with art and expression, it feels like putting yourself out there and bearing your soul when it comes to your art and expression is so like, it makes me nervous even thinking about it. There's
Yeah.
something so like the emperor with no clothes about it.
Bet that a little too transparent, but the this evolution will be interesting to see. When you get out of this, you've coached a lot of people to find their voice, and I think that as we watch this next part of Janna's flight, it'll be really neat to see how the kids adapt to what's been written. I love the podcast series. You touch on sort of different concepts on each episode, but they're all fascinating people except for the first one, me. But I just think that there's so much behind Janna Lopez that is really important for people to get a hold of right now at a point where life is a little bit uncertain. I I think when I post this video back up on my page, of course, like for people to be able to check out the podcast links and the book links, and you're really active on your social media accounts too,
I'm
so that
trying. I
they
don't
get to.
want to disappear.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to offer. It's nice that we get to see multiple hats that you will wear, and before we wrap up, would you just, there was something in the book that you were asked, who is Janna right now? And that was at a sort of a pivotal point in the book, and you painted a really long picture.
Yeah.
And I would think, without labeling yourself, who is Janna LOPEZ right
Oh shit, that's a
today?
hard question. I'm still searching and tender and young and innocent and jaded and worried and hopeful and connected and inspired and sometimes lonely. I think that's just where we are right now. But I think all things considered, I've done really well this last month or so. And I almost feel bad or guilty saying that because I know so many people are struggling, but we're all on our own path. But in terms of fertility of where I'm at, I have germinated a lot of really interesting seeds. I have no idea where any of them are going. I do teach a free weekly online workshop, and that is just to help people find and connect with their voice. I do that because I just want to give back, and I love people. And the photography, I'm still looking and exploring, and this podcast is awesome. I've got some amazing guests lined up, and that's been really beautiful. And I don't know if it's about being seen or being understood or feeling like I belong, or I want people to feel seen, to feel understood, and to help them feel belonged, like they belong. So I'm not quite sure if I'm needing to receive right now or if I'm still needing to give. The jury's not out on who I am yet.
Are they
I'm
exclusive? Can it be both?
maybe. I don't
Yeah.
know. What do you
Because
think?
I do. I think maybe you might feel a little guilty by saying that for me, it's hard to acknowledge that I'm, what drives me is to get attention, to seek those things, and receiving feels guilty to me.
I mean, don't we all want to know that we matter?
We absolutely do. We should be
I
heard. We
mean,
should be felt.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the expressive part of ourselves, at least for me, is not really something I'm comfortable or used to putting out there. So it was like really 6-year-old nervous, shy energy of putting it out. And when you asked me that, I had that same visceral reaction of being asked who I am. I
Hmm.
felt 6 years old again, like, I wanted to twirl my dress and hide behind somebody's leg. But it's an interesting thing. I'm in life, I'm doing life, I'm part of life. And am I really being in life? That's the interesting part. Who are we without what we do? But
Right.
how can we be? So that's the eternal question. And so I appreciate you asking that.
Yeah, I appreciate your answer, and it'll be fun to see what answer you might give 5 years from now. In the next book, we'll see if you're asked again. I think there's a lot to digest here. There's so much goodness, and I love the fact that you put it out there for people to interpret. And managing expectations is something that we can all ease up on a little bit for ourselves, right? That we can give ourselves some grace,
Especially now.
right? Especially right now. You bet. Even pre-pandemic, I think
Right.
the climate that we're in is volatile, and so there's I see people really on edge in a lot of different ways, and it concerns me. I want harmony for a lot of people, and not just people believing the way the other people believe. It's just nice to know that people can commiserate, in a positive way, and grow and feel healthy. So
I mean, the image that when you just said that, I imagined somebody trying to break dance on thin ice. Like that wouldn't be appropriate. Maybe now is the time to learn how to do some ballet.
Mm,
I mean,
yeah,
knowing where things are, can't you give yourself an opportunity to learn how to dance in a different way? Because you don't. I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
that's just the image I got. I don't know why.
I like it. You speak in metaphor often. It's really
I
nice.
do.
There are analogies everywhere. It's great in the book. I mean, I really enjoy it, and I think I encourage anybody, even if you don't read, folks, The
It's
audiobook.
on audio.
Yeah, they got the
Yeah.
audiobook is out there. She'll just read it to you. So just hang out, and I'll put links to the book and the website and the podcast, which are all together in one nice little bow at www.jannalopez.com.
Imagine that. Hey, I think I know a guy.
Yeah, it was really a fun website to work on with you. So
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Um, I think this would be one of those things where we look at chapter 2 in Janna's life in the next few years, and we see where we're at post pandemic. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm very inspired by what you've shown and who you've put on and the conversations you've had, and it's a very real, honest, true, beautiful testament to how many people are in your orbit. And I was talking to somebody, one of my podcast interviewees, his name is Bill Persky, and he's the guy who created That Girl and Dick Van Dyke
Oh
Show, and
wow.
he's 88 and just a fascinating guy who's had lunch with Fred Astaire and dined with Gene Kelly and just old Hollywood. But he said, I had asked him, when you look at your life now, what is it that you think about? And he said that I'm so proud of who loves me.
Mm,
And I thought that was just so beautiful because I bring that up because I think of you, and you can look at who's in your life
mm,
and who loves you and the amazing scope and breadth of talent and just dynamic energy and beautiful souls that you've surrounded yourself with that just love you just as you are, and I want you to know that I'm one of them. And that to me says so much about you, just everybody that you've brought together in your life.
mm. I and I can't even tell you how much I appreciate that. I am so blessed to have people in my life that matter so much to me. My kids are astounded, but Caleb is blown away that I have people that are so meaningful to me that to me they're an extension of my family, And when I talk about trusting people, I have so many incredible souls, and there aren't enough days in the year that I could do these conversations and catch up with people that have meant something to me in such a great way.
Right.
And that we've gotten to go beyond that superficial thing that we talked about early on in the conversation. I am just so grateful that I didn't shut people out, that my mom gave me the opportunity at 5 to put my hand out and extend it and offer friendship to someone, because one conversation I had with my kids, and I'm going to wrap my rant about this, is as teenagers, we're all materialistic. A lot of adults are too, right? But at 18, 19, 20, the first thing you're thinking about is what watch you have or what phone you've got, or, what coach bag you're carrying. And my thought has always been, as I travel a lot, is that the experiences you have are so much more valuable, right? And I've said this bunch of times on here, but Jim Carrey gave this speech, this commencement speech, to a bunch of business students a long time ago that I've used as the slogan for my company, the Silver Lining Company, that he said, the effect you have on others is the greatest form of currency there is. And I truly believe that you get what you give. And if you put yourself out there and find these people, those people are all out there, these wonderful souls that are willing to be generous and humble and collaborative and community. And like a miracle, like magic, you are one of those people that fell into my life, uh, and I can thank a whole bunch of people that helped make that happen just peripherally. Terry Courier was one of those people, and a lot of the community is like that. So even in our local community here, we've got people that are just incredible souls, creative people that are willing to be generous and look out for each other. That's the big thing for me. That I talked about accountability. There's so much that we have to do to look out for each other and less about looking out for ourselves. And I think that it comes back around, So I
And I
I
love that you said your 5-year-old, your mom. And here I am at my 6-year-old. So my six
yeah,
year old hand can take your 5-year-old
yeah.
hand.
There you
It's
go.
like,
Yeah.
here we are. We're just fucking regressing. Here we
No,
go.
that's not regressing one bit, man. If I
I
had
mean,
to,
that feels so pure, right?
yeah, that's when things didn't have all of the other filters in place, right? So, yeah, I love it. Thank you for acknowledging that. This whole process that I'm doing right now is just to express a full amount of gratitude to people that matter to me, and not so much about, I mean, it's great to be able to showcase people's abilities and books and CDs and albums, because those things are what make you you, while not being just your only identity, right? But I will say the next, I mean, just, I've got great people coming up that I know will just connect with you as well. I mean, downtown Julie Brown for tomorrow, for God's sake. I mean, downtown, Julie is so funny and such a just liberated spirit. She's so sweet and bubbly. I've been doing drum lessons with her in Italy, just to get her prepped. I'm going to try and put her on the spot tomorrow. But another beautiful soul, one of my favorite people on the planet on Thursday, Luke Duran, who you probably never met when he lived here, but he's back in Montana. But I feel like their personalities, they all come out when we do these. And it feels like I'm getting to share my best friends with all of my other best friends. Hopefully we're just one big, huge, collaborative community. And I just, I thank you, because you really have helped me in ways that you'll never know by just being who you are. So thank you.
Okay. I'll receive
Yeah.
that.
All right. Well,
I appreciate you.
thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. I will watch for chapter 2, the book 2 from Janna Lopez. And thank you guys for hanging out and listening to a really beautiful human being. So,
Nice to
uh,
hang out with everybody. We have no idea. I have no idea who's there. I'm sure
uh,
Kevin does, but thank
yeah,
you.
not yet, but I will. All right. Thank you, Janna. Have a beautiful day.
All right. Love you.
Love you too.